Hello and welcome to the European Football Talk podcast. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at Eredivisie's second place battle, the European fight in Italy, and a recent look at Ollie Watkins' form for Aston Villa and what he's doing differently on the new manager Unai Emery. Hello and welcome back. This is the European Football Talk podcast. I thought with this being the first episode, I'd give some time to talk about what we'll be talking about during this podcast. It'll be looking at football being played around Europe in the top divisions and taking a look at key talking points and memorable moments from the matches being played around the continent. If that's something that you're interested in, make sure to stick around. Every Friday, a new podcast will be published so you can enjoy more top-flight football from around Europe. So I think the first talking point that we should look at today is the battle for the Champions League places in Holland. And I think it's an important point to look at the developing battle between Ajax and PSV for that second place spot in the Eredivisie. It looks like Feyenoord will win the title this season. The last time a different team than Ajax won the title since 2017, which of course was Feyenoord. So looking at the last 5 games for PSV and Ajax, Ajax have won 3 of their last games, drew 1 and lost 1, whereas PSV have won 4 and drew 1 in that time. Both teams have scoring a lot of goals recently. However, the lack of defensive security has been an issue, particularly on Ajax's side, which has meant a few drop points in recent games. Neither team's really been tightly secured at the back. However, both teams are fully free-flowing in their attacking output, which is great to see for a neutral. However, coming to this stage in the season, both teams will be looking to maybe tighten up a bit more defensively if either are to capture that second place spot. PSV have been in fine form recently. They've been climbing up the table. Despite the sale of Cody Gakpo to Liverpool in the January transfer window, they've thrived quite a lot since that transfer has gone through, and they've built upon that with the current squad players. In fact, their last defeat was back on January the 24th against FC Emmen. Ajax are used to dominance in the Eredivisie. I think there's no denying that, having won a number of league titles, getting to the Champions League semi-final back in 2019 and being successful in their domestic cups. And I think if Ajax aren't able to get a Champions League spot, with it being a qualifying spot in the third round, a lot of players could leave, particularly key personnel. And I think for Ajax it's a pretty dangerous situation if they can't get that Champions League spot, with a lot of players already looking like they could move in the summer. I think without Champions League, it's an incentive really for players to possibly move out of Holland and into arguably bigger leagues in Europe. So looking at Ajax, who do I think's the key person for them coming to the tail end of the season? Well, I think looking at statistics, I think there's only one man really, which is Dusan Tadic. Tadic has 17 assists and 9 goals in 29 games this season. And it's not just the goal contributions that he's getting, but also just his creativity in the final third. I mean, looking at his statistics, he's averaging 4.8 key passes a game, and he's constantly looking to play that killer ball in behind the defence of Ajax's opponents. And he's also shown this with 7.7 progressive passes per 90. And I think with a player like Tadic, he's been around quite a while now. He's very used, he's experienced to the not so much a situation of where Ajax are in, but he's used to these big moments where his quality has to stand out. And I think having a player like Dusan Tadic on Ajax's team it's a huge positive. And I think if one man is to help them get over the line and get into second after what's been a pretty tough season for the club, I think it will be the Serbian. So moving on to PSV, I think pre-January, Cody Gakpo would have been the main man for PSV. I think his goals and assists were vital really for helping PSV get a number of wins. So with his sale, who's their key man now? And I think there's only one man to really talk about who stepped up really after the departure of Gakpo, and that's Xavi Simons. He's got 14 goals and 7 assists in 29 games for a 20-year-old, which is very good numbers. He's got a very bright future ahead of him. You can tell with his intelligence on the ball and just how good he is at reading the play. And he's been a really key person this year. One thing I really like about Simons is he's really good in tight spaces with really good footwork. And he averages 4.89 progressive carries and 2.29 successful take-ons per 90, which for PSV, having losing such a key person in Gakpo, having Xavi Simons to come in and then explode, like he was pretty good at the beginning of the season, but to completely explode in the second half is exactly what they needed if they were trying to get Champions League football. Looking at the running for the teams, neither one's really got an easy running, with teams fighting for other European places who they'll be facing come towards the end of the season. And they also face each other before they play any league game in a cup final, which I think could be an ultimum, really, for how either team could progress through these final league games and how motivated they feel in terms of pushing for that league game. And I think it's really good confidence as well for the players who are heading into them final key matches. So who do I think will get the second place? Well, I think both teams have their qualities, and I think, look at it on paper, I think there's an argument for either team to capture that second position in the Champions League, but I personally am going with Ajax. I think the problem which both teams will face is they both play AZ Alkmaar, who are fourth in the league, they have a possibility as well as getting Champions League, but they're more of an outsider when you look at it. And I think PSV play them away, which could be a stumbling block for PSV, particularly if AZ think they can push for that Champions League spot, which is still possible. And I think even though Ajax faced them as well, Ajax faced them at home in front of their home fans, which is really a favourable position for Ajax. And I think if PSV are to stumble away from home, I think Ajax will be ready to pounce on the opportunity to beat AZ and take that second position in the Champions League. So I think Ajax right now are the real possibility of getting that Champions League position. I think now it's time to turn the attention to the Serie A. I think looking at the Serie A this season in whole, I think a lot of people have been quite intrigued with a number of different players, a number of different teams in the league in terms of how they'll progress, especially since Juventus haven't been at their best recently. I think a lot of other teams have sort of excelled, with Juventus sort of falling down the league. And I think looking right now at the top three, it's quite an unusual circumstance, but the top three right now are all from the south, which is Napoli in first, Lazio second and Roma in third, and they've all had incredible campaigns really. Napoli are looking to win their third league title, their first since 1990, and then when you look at Lazio and Roma as well, both teams are looking to return to Champions League football under experienced managers, and I think looking at how these three teams are playing, it's quite an exciting time to be a fan of Italian football. Furthermore, I think looking at other teams as well, I think it is really an exciting time to be a Serie A fan. I think recently Inter Milan and AC Milan have both progressed to the Champions League semi-finals, and they're both in hot pursuit of the top three, but also with four places being available for the Champions League, either one of them could be also getting a Champions League position. And we can't forget Atalanta, who are in hot pursuit behind the two Milan clubs. One interesting situation that's developing in the Serie A is there's around 8 games left in the league, and a lot of these teams will play each other from now towards the end of the season, which means there could be a large mix-up in some of these positions in the league, and ultimately Champions League spaces as well. So with Napoli already clear, it looks like they will end their league drought, I thought I'd look at some key players for the other teams that are battling for these positions. I think there's no doubt that Lazio fans or people that have watched Lazio over the last few years have always talked highly about Sergej Milinkovic-Savic, and once again this season he's just been a fantastic player for Lazio. 6 goals and 8 assists in 28 games. However, that's not really what he's there to do. He's more there to dictate the play in the middle of the park, and he's just been a sensational footballer to watch this season. His aerial presence is really key in the middle of the park, winning a number of duels against people and carrying the ball. And the great footwork that he has in these areas makes him a danger for any opponent to really mark out of a game. And I think looking at Milinkovic-Savic, I think when you combine these attributes together, you make an incredible footballer, and he is an incredible football talent. I think if Lazio are to maintain their second place position, they will need Sergej Milinkovic-Savic to continue his great form really this season, and I'm sure he will. For Roma, I've gone with their new signing in the summer, which was Paulo Dybala. He's got 11 goals and 6 assists in 22 games, which is the most goals and assists at Roma this season in the league. One thing that Dybala does really well is he creates a lot of issues for the opposition defence, and he, despite not always hitting the target or scoring goals, he does take a high number of shots during a match, which causes problems for the defence of the opponent. Right now he's averaging 2.29 shots per 90, and ultimately he is a real danger to play against because his good footwork in tight spaces is really something which is hard to defend against really, and to then get into the space and create chances, but also taking them chances for himself is something which it is a huge danger. And I think again, if Roma are to get in the Champions League for what seems to have been a while without them in the Champions League, I think Dybala will be the key personnel in helping them attain that. For AC Milan, I've gone with midfielder Ismail Benacer, a key player in the Champions League second leg against Napoli. I think watching him a number of times break up the play in the middle of the park with the pace of Osimhen to get him behind, I think him breaking the play up a number of times in the middle of the park almost single-handedly won Milan that tie. It's not to say he was the only good player on the pitch, however he was a real standout player to watch in that second leg, and I think if you can continue that through the league games this season, I don't think there's any doubt really that AC Milan can definitely push on and get Champions League despite only being in 4th right now. Just looking at some of his statistics, he's averaging 5.7 progressive passes a game, whilst also making 2.98 tackles per game. And I think that just shows Benacer's quality all around the pitch. I think what Benacer brings to a team is security in the midfield, because he can excel on so many different levels, whether that's attacking or the defensive phases. And I think he's definitely a midfielder who has all the qualities which not a lot of midfielders do around Europe. And I think with Benacer, if they're able to keep him fit, I think there is a very highly chance that Milan might not just get Champions League, but they could also push Roma and Lazio to a 3rd or 2nd place, despite having a bit more football with the Champions League ties. For Inter Milan, I've gone with Hakan Çalhanoğlu as my player of choice. He's playing a slightly different role this season than he normally would for his teams. However, I don't think that's really stopped his quality, and if anything, I think he's proved his quality even more in this new sort of position for him. He's got 2 goals and 5 assists this season. However, that's not really what the impact of his play has been this season. He's been really a key creator for Inter from a sort of deeper position where he's able to carry the ball through the pitch and then also just supply the attacking talents on display, whether that's Lautaro Martinez, Lukaku, wing backs, wingers. He's really a almost like a deep lying playmaker in the sense of how he's playing. And I think with the quality he has, Inter could look, despite being out the Champions League places right now, Inter do look a strong team heading into these final matches, and if he's able to produce on a level, there's no reason that Inter can't really get the Champions League football that they require. For Atalanta, I've gone with Jeremy Boga. Despite a lack of number of league goals this season, he makes up with that with his creative ability. And I think watching Boga, he's just really an exceptional player with how he can combine his creative ability with his speed. And I think a player like that is always a danger on a football pitch, and there's been no doubt about that this season for Boga. I mean, just look at his statistics, it's really impressive. He's made 6.83 progressive passes per game, 7.66 progressive carries, and 4.71 successful take-ons. And I think looking at them statistics, he's not just a major outlet for Atalanta, but you could argue he's a major outlet just across Europe. And I think it speaks volumes of how good he is as a player in terms of his creative ability, and he's able to link up well with players, particularly Ademola Lookman and Højlund, who have scored goals for Atalanta this season. But I think Boga's mainly been almost underrated by fans in terms of what he can do for the team. And I think to spark Atalanta into the Champions League, they need Boga to be playing at a high level, which he has done all season. And even though it's an outside chance right now, I do think with Boga on the pitch, there's definitely a possibility for Atalanta to possibly climb into the 4th position. Right now, it's probably too tough to say who will get Champions League football in the Serie A. However, over the weeks, I think the development will be very interesting to see who clinches the Champions League spaces in Italy. And I think this is certainly something to keep an eye on over the coming weeks. One player that's been mentioned in the media recently, and I think has fully deserved the credit that he's received, is Ollie Watkins. Since Unai Emery joined Aston Villa a few months ago, many people have improved on the pitch at Aston Villa, particularly defensively and attacking wise, because Villa were really conceding a lot of goals and not really scoring enough, whereas the midfield play was okay, but that has improved under Unai Emery. However, I don't think many have improved as well as Ollie Watkins has during these few months. Watkins has always had the ability. I think his pace and IQ are really strong points to his game, and he's a very clever footballer with well-timed runs in behind the defence. However, his problem has been consistency and the final product over the last few seasons. However, under Emery, I think he's improved this pretty quickly, and I think every game he's getting better. Just analysing him against Newcastle, very early on, he was occupying the left half space in between Trippier and Schär, and I think that was really creating problems for Newcastle in that game. I mean, early on he hit the post occupying that space, and then later on wins the header that's knocked down to Ramsey, who scores the goal and puts Villa 1-0 ahead. He seems a lot more confident and composed in these final spaces, and when his teammates are supplying him, he just almost seems to know where to make the run, and I think that's just credit to him and also his teammates, but also the manager in Emery and his management skills and how he's just developed these players over not even a long period, but a really short period, and how he's took these from, a team that looked like they could be in a relegation battle beginning of the season to now pushing for European football. He's worked really, really well with Ramsey recently, and there was a period where they were working really well in terms of making Newcastle players press up the pitch and then leaving the space for Watkins in behind to make these killer runs on Schär. However, it wasn't just the left where he was controlling play. Sometimes he would move out onto the right, where making key runs to help his teammates find the space in the box was just a really important piece of his play. and it helped Villa in a number of positions almost create a few more chances to put a few more goals past Newcastle. Although they didn't really, it was still pretty effective from Watkins' game. Watching his runs, you can tell they're extremely well timed because he doesn't make the same run twice. He makes a lot of late and early runs, and he mixes these up, and it not just puts pressure on the defence, but it also puts pressure on his teammates to know which he's going to do, and his teammates have performed to a level where they know what Watkins will do. And then the second goal for Villa, the Watkins first goal, was very similar to Villa's first goal, where he found space in between the full-back and the centre-back, this time being Botman and Byrne, and he calmly just slotted the ball into net, which was a really, really great goal. One thing I noticed was his overall awareness in the box has improved quite a bit. He makes key runs in the area and finds angles not just for himself but his teammates to make a positive impact from, which has been a great part of his success right now in the league. It's not just his goal scoring, the playmaking has been a really positive sign for Watkins, and I think Emery has definitely helped that in just the short period he's been there. He's been a really key player in helping Villa push up to where they are in the league right now, in the European places, but Villa do have some tough games coming up against teams which are also looking for European football or teams that are fighting against relegation. If Watkins can maintain this high level though, there is a real possibility that European football will be played at Villa Park next season. I think it's too early to call right now in the league. However, if Watkins can still supply with how he did against Newcastle and has done in other games, there is a very likely chance that it is possible for Villa. This is the part of the show where we get you involved to see who the player is in Who Am I? I'll be giving you 3 hints to see if you can guess the footballer. Hint 1. In my career, I have played in Italy, France and Spain. Hint 2. I have won a domestic trophy in the first season as a professional player. And hint number 3. I have won the second most amount of appearances for my country. The answer to this week's Who Am I will be revealed ahead of next week's segment of Who Am I, so make sure you get your guesses in ahead of next week's podcast. So much has been discussed in this episode of the podcast, and I think each topic has a really interesting line, and to see how their seasons will progress through this season with the final few weeks coming is a very interesting thing to look at. So what does this week have in store? Will 3rd place Lens take on 4th place Monaco in the battle for the ages for Champions League football in France? Over in Spain, Elche play Valencia in what is a relegation battle. Who can come out on top in that game will be vital to see who could possibly stay in the division next season in Spain. Over in Austria, 1st place RB Salzburg play 2nd place Stream in what seems to be a very important title decider over there. And finally, over in the Premier League, 4th place Newcastle play 5th place Spurs in what could be a very important match to see who clinches a possible Champions League spot over in England. Plus, there's plenty more action going on around Europe. Thanks for tuning in to the very first episode of the European Football Talk podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. You can follow me over on Twitter at DanielMoffat16 and we could discuss much more. We can talk Ajax PSV, Serie A football, Ollie Watkins form and much more over on Twitter. And you can tell me who you think the player is behind Who Am I this week. Thanks once again, and I'll chat to you in the next episode. Thanks and goodbye.